Okay, welcome everyone and good evening. It's so nice to see all of you virtually. We're going to get started since we are short on time tonight. I want to make sure we complete our program. It's truly hard to believe that 157 days have passed since the beginning of Masechet Shabbos, and so much has happened during that time period. Of course, we began just at the beginnings of COVID and are now ending some months in. And of course, the learning will be so etched in our mind forever, not only because of all that we learn in this tremendous Masechta, which contains so much in halacha and hashkafa, but also etched in our mind because of the time period that we've been going through and all the experiences that we've been going through, which are connected in many ways. And highlights for me, as I'm sure it does for many of you, just how much Torah comes alive on almost every daf. There was something connected to the events of the day, the events of the week, and certainly even the events of COVID, which makes our learning all that much more powerful. This is a celebration tonight, not just for all of us who are on this Zoom call, not just for our community in KMS and beyond, but really for the entirety of the Jewish world, for those who learn Daf Yomi and those who don't learn Daf Yomi. As I mentioned, the Siyum on Brachos so many months ago. This is really a celebration of Torah in our era, Torah in our generation, which continues, Baruch Hashem, to flourish and to continue to see in our community such beauty in learning, such strong learning by men and by women, and learning in Gemara and learning in Tanakh. And I think all of that is continuing to flourish more and more every day, which is truly beautiful and truly a nace. And we have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for the ability to participate in such high-level learning, which is not a given in every place, in every community around the world. I'm honored tonight that 4 individuals have agreed to share with us just a very brief thought each about something that they loved or something that they learned in Masechet Shabbos, giving us a little bit of taste of the Masechta as a whole. We're going to hear tonight from Shana Winters, David Janis, Alana Weinberg, and Ira Rabin. And then the Hadron will be recited by Jonathan Rosenberg. And since we will have Imrit Hashem a minyan here from Mincha Maariv, we'll actually be able to recite Kaddish here at the end of the Siyum, which will be said by Richard Dine. If you're not here on site, you're welcome to answer to Kaddish if you're listening through the Zoom, and everyone else is welcome to listen on as well. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it all over to our participants so that we don't waste any more time. You should be able to each unmute yourselves in turn, and Shana, I'll ask you to begin.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Given how many of us listen to Daf Yomi on podcasts, I was thinking that if I speak at time and a half, it may be easier to understand what I'm saying. Before I start, I just wanted to say that part of my inspiration in learning is actually from somebody in the community. Barbara Goldschlag has been a huge role model for me in her commitment to learning Daf Yomi and all Torah. So with that, I'll just start by saying, for me, Daf Yomi has kind of opened my eyes to all the stories that I heard in day school and then some. And so it's really nice to learn that. I wanted to talk about one specific idea that I learned that I never knew before, which is unique to Shavuot, is the idea that it's celebrated at the culmination of a defined period of counting. However, when the Torah talks about the holiday, it refers to the generality of the season, like Chag HaBikurim or Zman Matan Toratenu, not a specific date. In fact, the timing of Matan Torah is not only obscured, but ends up being a point of controversy, which I had never known before. This issue is discussed not in Psachim, where the counting starts, or Chagiga, which deals with the Shalosh Regalim, but rather in the Gemara and Masechet Shabbos. And in determining the day of the week and the date of the giving of the 10 Commandments, Tanu Rabbanan b'shishi b'chodesh nitnu aseret hadibrot liYisrael, Rabbi Yossi Omer b'shiv avo. So how could it be that the most momentous event defining us as a people, the giving of the 10 Commandments, doesn't have a clear date associated with it, right? So the Chachamim are saying it's the 6th of Sivan, and Rabbi Yossi is saying it's the 7th. The particularity of days seems to have real significance in other places in the Gemara. For example, just in yesterday's daf, there was an entire discussion of which day of the week it's most auspicious to be born on, and how one's destiny is based on the day that they were born. So the Gemara attempts to establish the timeline for when the Jews received the Torah. First, they determined that the Jews arrived in Sinai on Rosh Chodesh Sivan. And the Gemara draws that from the connection in the Psukim of Bayom Hazeh, Ba'u Midbar Sinai, and the same phrasing when it talks about Rosh Chodesh, HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem Rosh Chodeshim. So it just uses the word Hazeh to declare the new moon, in the same way Hazeh shows that when they arrived to Sinai, it was Rosh Chodesh. Then they determine what day of the week the Torah was given on. And Rava says, Udachume Alma, B'Shabbat nitna Torah l'Yisrael. Everyone agrees that the Torah was given to Israel on Shabbat. So then the Chachamim take us on a series of calculations of the Hebrew calendar, retracing Moshe's steps up and down the mountain to try and find support for whether it was on the 6th day of Sivan or the 7th day of Sivan. And what they ultimately get to is the underlying motivation, which is to try to draw a parallel between the days of creation and the moments leading up to the acceptance of the Torah. So on Daf Peichet Amar Aleph, it says, Vayhi Erev, Vayhi Boker Yom Hashishi. And Reish Lakish says, why is there an extra hey when it talks about the 6th day? And he notes that it's really to allude to the other 6th day, which is the giving of the Torah. And it teaches that God told the creations of the world that if the Jews accept the Torah, they'll endure. And if not, the world will return to Tohu Vavohu. The Gemara in this debate about which date, and as Rashi explains, teaches that the entire creation was predicated on Israel's acceptance of the Torah. Unlike holidays, Shabbat is not rooted in nature. Time is divided into days, nights, months, not in 7-day cycles. And in fact, on Daf Masechet, there are hypothetical questions about the responsibility of people who lose track of what day of the week it is and mistakenly observe Shabbat on the wrong day or does work on Shabbat. The creation story here ties the 7-day cycle to creation itself, attributing Shabbat to the first Shabbat to Hashem. The Shabbat, therefore, in the words of Heschel, is a sanctuary in time, a designated holy day of rest. And you can see where I'm going here. Here too, Matan Torah also doesn't have a specific date, but was predicated by days in which Am Yisrael had to prepare for the acceptance of the Torah. And just like we counted up to the days of the week in preparation of observing Shabbat, we count up to the weeks in preparation of observing Matan Torah. Drawing parallels to the creation of the world, Matan Torah is a reminder that adhering to mitzvot is also not bound by natural time, but required of us every day. And so I'll end with something from Rav Yitzchak Arma, who is a 15th century scholar who wrote the Akedat Yitzchak. And he says, the Torah was indeed received at Mount Sinai on the day of Shavuot, although a special day should not be set aside for this. Insofar as remembrance of the Torah and our receiving it is not for a specific time, like the themes of other festivals. Rather, the commandments pertain to every day, every hour. As it says in Yehoshua, V'higita bo yomam v'layla. We are commanded that it be fresh and beloved of us as on the day it was given. And this is a theme that runs true for observing Shabbat and Matan Torah. And given that connection between creation and Matan Torah, it's no wonder that this explanation can actually be found in Masechet Shabbat.
Thank you so much, Shana. That was wonderful. I'll pass it out over to David.
So thank you very much. Shana, that was great. That's a tough act to follow, but I will do my best. Very excited to be finishing Masechet Shabbat. This is my first time doing Daf Yomi, and I found the experience so far both interesting as well as a little bit intimidating. But I'd like to thank Rabbi Weinberg for inviting me to share a few thoughts this evening. So generally speaking, I am definitely drawn more to Agadata than I am to the more technical halachic discussions. And needless to say, this can make Daf Yomi a bit of a challenge, since most of Shas, of course, focuses on those technical halachic discussions. And I think, as we all know, for the most part, Chazal are concerned primarily with rules regarding our actions. Matters that are related to what we would call philosophy or theology are really not their priority. But when those matters are discussed, they're generally quite fascinating and are certainly the sections that personally I find to be the most engaging. So one such discussion appears on 89b, just not too far from where Shauna was focused on, and there we find Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani brings down in the name of Rabbi Yonatan an interpretation of a pasuk from Yeshayahu, and that pasuk reads as follows: it says, "Ki ata avinu, ki Avraham lo yadanu, v'Yisrael lo yakiranu. Ata Hashem avinu go'alenu me'olam shemecha," which is, the Koran translates, "For you are our father, for Avraham knows us not, and Israel does not acknowledge us. You, Lord, are our Father, our Redeemer, everlasting is your name." So in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through the whole drasha that follows on the pasuk, but the bottom line is that of the three avot, it's only Yitzchak that really comes to the defense of the Jewish people and intercedes on their behalf with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. So Yitzchak argues in actually a really interesting way, but Yitzchak argues that Am Yisrael really, at the end of the day, they really don't have so many sins, which he comes to that conclusion through talking about how people use their days and use their years. And again, in the end, there really aren't so many sins that we have to be so concerned about. But once he gets to that reduced number of Averot, he essentially tries to cut a deal with Hashem. And the deal is that I, Yitzchak, will take responsibility for half of this smaller number of sins, and you, Hashem, you'll bear the other half. But then he concludes, and again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to read this from the Koran translation in English. He says that, and if you say that all of them, you, Hashem, if you say that all of these sins are upon me, upon Yitzchak, I sacrifice my soul before you, and you should forgive them due to my merits. So then the Gemara continues that the Jewish people begin to say to Yitzchak, you are our father, Ata Avinu. And then, but Yitzchak, so Yitzchak, who has defended the Jewish people, but he says to the Jewish people, he says, no, before you praise me, praise HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Yitzchak points to HaKadosh Baruch Hu before their eyes. Immediately they lift their eyes to the heavens and say, Ata Hashem Avinu Go'alenu Me'olam Shemecha. Again, at the end of that pasuk from Yeshayahu. So clearly what Yitzchak is referring to here is the Akedah. But the implication is that the Akedah somehow provides a mechanism for the forgiveness of the sins of Bnei Israel on an ongoing basis. But Yitzchak is quite careful and quickly redirects the praise of the Jewish people that they're bringing. He redirects the praise away from himself and towards Hashem. So there's a lot to say about this passage. I'm not going to attempt to get into it at the moment. Suffice it to say that I think the theological idea here is one that the Chazal are probably very well familiar with, and maybe in their time. But what I really want to highlight right now is just the fact that that one can be learning daf after daf, dwelling on the nitty-gritty details of what is permitted, what is not permitted to do on Shabbat, and then suddenly the Gemara moves in a very different direction. So in this passage, we moved in the direction of theology, but elsewhere in the Masechet, we encounter all sorts of discussions regarding medical advice, diet tips, many other non-halachic topics. And for me, it's these jumps that are particularly fascinating. And I'm definitely looking forward to many more of them as we continue on to Masechet Eruvin, and hopefully beyond that. So again, thank you very much, and looking forward to hearing from our other speakers.
Thank you so much, David. Great snapshot of what the Gemara is all about and what's entailed in each and every daf. Alana.
Good evening, everyone, and Mazel Tov to all those who completed Masechet Shabbat today. I'm sure that for many of us, if not all of us, as Bram just said, the experience of learning Masechet Shabbat cannot be divorced from the pandemic that has accompanied us throughout these 157 pages and will unfortunately continue to follow us into Masechet Eruvin. As I was preparing these remarks last night, rereading my daily musings on each daf, I noticed that, for better or for worse, much of what piqued my interest on any given day was something on the daf that would help me cope with our new reality. One could say daily chizuk from Chazal. Some of my daily musings related to disease or illness itself. For example, on Daf Yud Bet Amud Bet, otherwise known as Day 5 of when the world shut down, we learned, V'amar Rabbi Chanina, B'koshi hitiru lenachem avilim ulebaker cholim b'Shabbat. That although one is not really supposed to make requests in Tefillah on Shabbat, we see that it was with great difficulty that Chazal permitted one to visit the sick and comfort the mourners on Shabbat, and that they even composed a special tefillah of refuah for Shabbat. As David just alluded to, about 2 months into the pandemic, the Gemara, on Dapim Samach Vav and Samach Zayin, began a detailed discussion of incantation and amulets that were popular during the times of the Gemara to cure drunkenness, prevent miscarriage, dislodge a bone caught in one's throat, and cure disease. While to our scientific minds, these ideas seemed far-fetched and highly ineffective, from my perspective, I thought, why not give them a shot? I mean, from the perspective of Chazal, perhaps injecting live, weakened, or dead virus into a person also seems strange. However, the focus of Masechet Shabbat is clearly not disease. It is a Masechet coming to teach us in a highly technical and somewhat philosophical way how to appreciate a day that has sustained us for thousands of years and will continue to do so long after COVID. Shabbat is supposed to be Me'en Olam Haba, a little slice of the world to come, where, as we learned on Daf Kuf Yud Gimel, Mimtso Chavatzecha Asurim, Chavtzei Shamayim Mutarim, V'daber Davar, Shelo Yehe Diborcha Shel Shabbat Ki Diborcha Shel Chol. While the idea of making Shabbat feel different in the way we speak, walk, and dress is certainly not new to me, I gained much more of an appreciation for these laws by learning the Masechet in a COVID world. When it was easy to lose track of time, as the traveler did on Daf Samach Tet Amud Bet, when one day felt exactly as the day before it, when one could easily get away with wearing his or her pajamas for 6 consecutive days, I felt myself yearning for Shabbat more and more each week these last few months. It brought a weekly change of pace to me and to my family, moved the conversation with our children away from Wi-Fi speeds and Zoom passwords to, here's your Shabbos cereal, and when you're done, please go put on some real clothes. Ironically, I think the way that we've been experiencing Shabbat these last few months more closely aligns to how Shabbat felt in the times of the Mishnah and Gemara than ever before. Those of us who completed the Masechet know that much of the Masechet speaks about carrying across various domains on Shabbat, what could be carried, in what quantity it could be carried, and what could be worn. Personally, I can't wait to join Rachel, the wife of Rabbi Akiva, and as we learned on Daf Nun Tet Amud Bet, wear my Ir Shel Tahav when all of this is over. In fact, finding a way to transport items across domains was of such significance that Chazal created the concept of Eruv, which we will begin studying tomorrow, in order to make going out on Shabbat more feasible for more individuals. Although for me personally, Hotza'ah was not necessarily the most interesting topic, perhaps it was and still is the most important one, albeit considered from a halachic standpoint a mlacha grua, an insufficient act. Rabbanit Michelle Farber pointed out once in one of her shiurim that today, it does not take much for us to imagine the isolation people must have felt throughout the week, working in their fields, being confined largely to their own private domains. Shabbat was such a relief to them. Once a week, everyone would gather together in the Beit Knesset, women and men alike, to hear the drasha of the Rev, or even would invite friends over to share a meal, but not read off the menu. See Daf Kuf Menchet Amud Bet. For myself, I know that I have looked forward more and more each week for the opportunity to silence devices, turn off Zoom, and just enjoy a family walk that invites opportunities to see people at a distance. The need for connection was as great then as it is nowadays, so in hindsight, I appreciate how much time Chazal invested into making these opportunities possible. Shabbat itself, though, has not been the only way that I've been able to create connections with people during this time. Through the KMS Daf Yomi WhatsApp group, I have felt connected to our KMS community of learners and have gained much from their insights and perspectives. Learning Torah creates lasting bonds and connections which surpass age, profession, or political views. Our Daf Yomi community reminds me every day that Rav may have gotten it wrong when he declared on Daf Kuf Lamed Chad Amud Bet, Atidah Torah Shetishtakach MeYisrael, that in the future, Torah will be forgotten among the Jewish people. Each day we prove, like Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Chas v'shalom Shetishtakach Torah MeYisrael. While we may not agree on a clear-cut halachic system, as he so rightly pointed out, Torah learning was and continues to be a dynamic experience that connects us in the deepest of ways. Wishing everyone much health, safety, and success as we journey on together. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana, for those inspiring words. Now we move on to Ira.
Good evening, hearty yeshkoach and mazel tov to everyone who's finished, and to the great divrei Torah from Shana, David, and Mrs. Weinberg. Shabbos is one of the longest and most technical and intricate Masechtas in all of Shas. It is an in-depth journey into the 39 categories of malacha, work, and the various subcategories within those 39. We even dive into one's ability to predict whether a certain malacha might occur based upon an activity or what one's mindset might have been at the outset of that activity. Much of Masechet Shabbos also deals with muktzah, rabbinically decreed items that are set aside and not used on Shabbos, and from there delves into the several subcategories of muktzah. Along the way, we learn what constitutes private property, public domains, alleyways, yards, all the way to what kind of wax one may light candles with a detour into the story of Hanukkah. Later, we cover everything one could ever want to know about ovens and cooking, clothing and jewelry that can be worn on Shabbos, interactions with animals, playing ball, tying knots, timing of trips before Shabbos, and even dealing with dead bodies on Shabbos. In one of the most difficult chapters, Klal Gadol, we get the sobering facts of one's obligations if one is guilty of violating any of the laws. We also have many medical discussions about if and how one can address certain ailments with Talmudic grand rounds taught by Shmuel, the most famous of Talmudic doctors. The Masechta also segues into fascinating discussions about astrology, the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai, and even has a unique Agadata where preschoolers give an amazing drashot based off the Aleph-Bet, perhaps proving the well-known adage that everything we really did need to know we learned in kindergarten. As we move along in the Masechta, we learn about details of Tuma and Tahara, purity and impurity, about a circumcision on Shabbos, and if and how one can get dirt off their clothing, and also details about the Tchum, the allotted distance one may walk on Shabbos, as well as if and how we may ask non-Jews to intervene on our behalf. However, despite all of the arguments, statements, laws, customs, discussions, and stories throughout the Masechta, perhaps the real lesson of Masechet Shabbos can be found by simply paying attention to a couple of often overlooked details in the very first and the very last Mishnah in the Masechta, 156 double-sided pages apart. When analyzed, shed light onto why Shabbos is an os, a sign between Hashem and the Jewish people, and really the glue that has kept the Jews together throughout the generations, even though, by the way, glue is muktzah. In the first Mishnah, there is a story where we encounter a poor person standing on the doorway of a homeowner hoping for some food. While the crux of the Mishnah is about handing things from one domain to another on Shabbos, the subtle details are striking. The individuals are nameless. There is no discussion from one to the other. There's no invitation from the homeowner to the poor man to come in. The lashon, or language of the Mishnah, is quite blunt. There isn't even a discussion between the two. No invitation to come inside, not even a good Shabbos. While detailed in law, it is blatantly absent in humanity. Contrast this with the final Mishnah, where the father of Rabbi Tzadok and Abba Shaul together seal a window and try to figure out whether a barrel had an opening of the size of a tefach. The Gemara explains that the barrel was on top of the roof of the two homes connected by an alleyway, and perhaps the opening of the barrel meant that the two homes could be viewed as one for the purposes of purity and impurity. Yet I think the lesson is clear. At the beginning of the Masechta, we see a nameless, faceless, and wordless interaction. But at the end, we have two neighbors, friends, together, both of whom are called Abba, Father, full of love and compassion, two people whose homes have potentially become one. So while, yes, we must know muksa machmas gufo from machmas chisaron kis, or the machlokas between Rashi and Tosfos, as to what a malacha shenis richa legufo is, we also must know why this is all important. While Shabbos is an oath between man and God, perhaps it is the oath between man and man. And while today, because of COVID, we are forced to engage on Shabbos from across our thresholds without any invitations to come in, that when this eventually and finally does end, we do our best to return as one extended domain, one community, and in reality, as one family.
Thank you, Ira, for that fantastic overarching view of the Masechta. Jonathan, I'd like to invite you to read the last few lines and continue with the Hadron.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yasher Koch to everybody. We'll just read the very last lines of Masechet Shabbat. First of all, the Gemara quotes the very end of the very last Mishnah, which says, from the stories which are enumerated in the Mishnah, we learn that you can seal up, you can measure, and you can tie up on Shabbat. Ula ikla leve Reish Galuta. So Ula happened to be visiting the house of the Reish Galuta. Chazia la Rabba bar Rav Huna diyatfe ba'avna demaya. He found Rabba bar Rav Huna sitting in a bathtub. V'kam mashachle, and he seemed to be measuring something. Amar le, Emar de Amre Rabbanan mididei de mitzvah, the lav mitzvah mi amor. The rabbi said that, you can measure things for the sake of a mitzvah, but can you measure things not for the sake of a mitzvah? Amar le, so he answered him, mitasek ba'al ma'ana, I'm just horsing around. So, and the point of that, of course, is that the kind of work which is forbidden on Shabbat is deliberate work which is done inadvertently when you're just horsing around doesn't really count. Hadran alach masachet Shabbat v'hadrach alan, datan alach masachet Shabbat v'datan alach, v'datach alan, l'nit Hashem inach masachet Shabbat, l'nit Hashem inam v'amah hadein v'amah datei. Hadran alach masachet Shabbat v'hadrach alan, datan alach masachet Shabbat v'datach alan, l'nit Hashem inach masachet Shabbat, l'nit Hashem inam v'amah hadein v'amah datei. Hadran alach masachet Shabbat v'hadrach alan, Datan alach masachet Shabbat v'datach alan, l'nit Hashem inach masachet Shabbat, l'nit Hashem inam v'amah hadein v'amah datei. Yehi ratzon milfanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elahei Avotenu, shetehei toratcha emunatenu v'olam hazeh, v'tehi imanu li'olam haba. Chanina bar Papa, Rami bar Papa, Nachman bar Papa, Achai bar Papa, Abba Mari bar Papa, Rachman bar Papa, Rachish bar Papa, Surcha bar Papa, Ada bar Papa, Daru bar Papa. Arevna Adonai Eloheinu, v'tirei toratcha b'finu v'fiviot amcha beit Yisrael v'niyah kulanu anachnu v'tzetzeinu v'tzetzei amcha beit Yisrael kulanu yodei shmecha v'lamdei toratecha me'oivai techakmenem mitzvotecha ki v'olam hili yehi libi tamim b'chukecha l'man lo nevosh v'olam lo eshkach b'kudecha ki vam pitani baruch atah Adonai lamdeni chukecha amen 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 sela ba'ed. Modim anachnu lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elahei Avotenu shesamtach elkenim yoshvei beit hamidrash v'lo samtach elkenim yoshvei koranot she'anu mashkimim v'hem mashkimim anu mashkimim l'divrei Torah v'hem mashkimim l'dvarim b'telim anu amelim v'hem amelim anu amelim u'mekablim sachar v'hem amelim v'einam mekablim sachar anu ratzim v'hem ratzim anu ratzim l'chayei ha'olam haba v'hem ratzim l'ver shachat shne'emar V'yata Elohim toridem lever shachat anshe damim u'mirma v'echatzu yemehem v'ani eftach bach. Yehi ratzon lefanecha Adonai Elohai Kashem azartani b'sayim Masechet Shabbat kain ta'azreini lahatchil masechtot u'sfarim achirim u'lesaimam u'lmod u'lamed lishmor v'lasot u'lekayem et kol divrei Talmud Toratecha v'yava v'zchut tol hatanaim v'ha'amoraim v'talmidei chachamim yamod li L'zari shalot tamush haTorah mipi zari v'zera zari ad olam. V'dit kayem bi hitchalechacha tancheotach v'shoch b'cha tishmor alecha v'hakitzot ahit zikecha. Kivi yerbuyamecha v'yosifu l'cha shnot chayim orech yamim b'mina v'smola osher kavod Adonai oz l'moyitein Adonai yivarech et amo b'shalom.
So I'm going to lead the Kaddish for the Siyum. Those of you who are here and completed the Masechet are certainly welcome to join in reciting along with me. Those of you on Zoom who completed, you can't do the whole Kaddish, but I'll try to keep you in mind. And as the rabbi said, everyone on Zoom can certainly answer. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah v'yamad hu atid li'itcha data v'lachaya meitaya v'la'asaka yaton l'chai alma v'minvei karta d'Yerushalayim L'chala hechle v'gava u'makar polchana nuchra'a me'ar'a la'atava polchana dishma la'atre v'yamlich kucha b'richu v'malchutei v'yikarei v'chayecho v'yomecho v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kariv v'yimru amen.
Yehi Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam U'mei Amaya. Yiparach, Vishtabach, Vipa'ar, Vidramam, Vidnasei, Vidhadar, Vidaleh, Vidhalal, Shmei Kudusha, Baruchu. Amin Kol Birchata, Vishirata, Tushbachata, Venechamata, Damiran, Biama, Vimru, Amen. Al Yisrael, Vial Rabbanan, Vial Tamidehon, Vial Kol Tamidehon, Vial Kol Man, Daskim, Baraita, Viva Dra Hadain, Vidiva Kol Atar, Vatar, Yehei, Lahon, Lachon, Shalom Rabach, Hina, Vechista, Rachamei, Vechaye, Ariche, Muzanei, Reviche, Ufurkana, Min Kodam, Avahon, Divishmaya, Vimru, Amen. Yehei, Shalama, Rabba, Min Shemaya, Vachayim Tovim Aleinu, Kol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen. Oseh, Shalom Ramav, Hu Yasev Rachamav, Shalom, Aleinu, Yakol Yisrael, Vimru, Amen.
Mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov, simin tov, mazel tov, mazel tov, simin tov, simin tov, mazel tov, simin tov, Yeilanu, Yeilanu, Mazel tov to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here and over Zoom. We wish you all mazel tov and hatzlacha in Masechet Eruvin. Looking forward to gathering for many happy occasions in the future. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. Asher.